Have you ever noticed how being light, expressive, or joyful somehow can suddenly make people question your credibility? And somehow it gets confused with being unserious. Have you ever felt that quiet pressure to tone yourself down, not because you're incapable, but because in people's eyes, you don't look the part? Well, that tension between being fully yourself and being taken seriously is the duality that I want to talk about today in this third episode of the series on becoming everything. Welcome to The Bold Beginner, the space where you get to feel seen and heard, and where you're reminded that starting over is not a failure. This is your space to breathe, to mess up, to try again, to take it slow, and to remember that you're allowed to reinvent yourself as many times as you need. And if you're ready to take back control of your life, you're in the right place. It was really important for me to talk about these two identities today, these two archetypes that we all carry in us. The playful, the light person in us versus the credible / the serious one, because it's very much present again in my life these days. I'm currently working on a new project, and yet again, it's something that's very new and definitely outside of my comfort zone again. And so, of course, the good old imposter syndrome is back. And every time you start doing something unfamiliar, the same questions come back of, am I credible enough? Are people going to take seriously what I'm about to launch or what I'm about to do or work on? Or another big question, which is it going to be seen as quote unquote not serious enough? Whatever that means, and according to whoever's standards it is. So I chose to talk about that duality specifically today because it hits home again. This very specific insecurity that makes you question not just the project that I'm working on, but myself. So this episode feels very much alive for me. And if you feel very similar at the moment, or if you've ever felt this opposition between these two identities, make sure that you comment. I would love it if you subscribe and give me your opinions or your experience on how you've dealt with this opposition before. And I think these two archetypes are actually quite interesting because they become somehow contradictory, or their opposition becomes somehow some sort of a problem later on in life. Like, it's not something that's being a problem as you grow up, or at least I didn't experience it that way. When I was at school or when I was growing up, I was quite often the quote unquote the clown of my friends group, the one that's lighthearted, the one that is making jokes or that doesn't take herself too seriously. I would definitely be taking jokes. I loved, and I still love it to this day, to an extent, making jokes at my own expense. I think it's a very great thing to have, self-derision and not to take yourself that seriously. And what's interesting is that when you grow up, you actually somehow get socially rewarded for being fun, for being the lighthearted one. But somehow, down the line, it slowly shifts to this confusion of lightness equals lack of credibility. If you're the clown, if you're funny, you can't be that good at what you're doing, or you can't be that serious. And obviously, the first thing that comes to mind, because it's mostly been in my experience, is the professional world. But I do know for a fact that it's also something that's been impeding a lot of people in their love life, for instance. I've heard a lot of my friends telling me, like, well, I'm quite often mistaken for the forever friend. No one takes me seriously, or no one considers seriously being in a relationship with me because I'm just the clown. I'm just the funny one. And so this thing that somehow people appreciate as you grow up becomes not your worst enemy, but becomes something that you want to refrain, or that you see contradictive to being taken seriously. And sometimes you start feeling bad about it in very subtle ways. It's not something that just comes brutally. It creeps in kind of insidiously. So obviously I'll talk about my experience because that's what I've seen firsthand. But For me, it started more specifically when I was studying at university, and I started to hear more and more. Maybe I just realized more and more. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe it was always there, and I just started realizing it when I was a student at uni. But I noticed more and more these subtle comments like, "Oh, but you're a bit of a special case. Like, no one really knows how you made it here," kind of thing, because you're not the usual profile, right? And it was always said in very light-hearted ways, and it was coming from friends, and I do know for a fact that it never came from a place of meanness or wanting to hurt me, but somehow it creeps on you. Maybe I don't belong. Maybe they're right. Maybe the fact that I'm this person that just throws banters every time that we have a break, or the person that's considered the funny one in the group does not belong to something, a bit more serious. And I'm insisting on the seriousness because that's quite often what would lead to these jokes, right? Like I would be making a series of joke and the conclusion to that would be like, yeah, we don't really know how you made it here, kind of thing. And the implicit rule or the implicit um criticism in that, I guess, is that seriousness equals legitimacy. If you're not serious, you're not legit. If you don't talk about the assignments that we have to do, if you don't talk about the topics that we're studying day in and day out, then maybe you're not serious about it. If you are so crazy that you actually prefer your time off and living your life and enjoying your time off over being at school and studying and blah blah blah, if you actually enjoy partying, if you enjoy going out with your friends, if you speak about it, if you talk about it, then surely you're not that serious about the studies. That's how it felt over time anyway. And so obviously because of how repetitive it was, I ended up questioning myself many, many times. Many times I was thinking maybe they're absolutely right. Maybe I don't belong. Why am I even changing every year? Is it okay that I actually prefer not being at school but enjoying my time off? These sort of things. And so I ended up thinking maybe I'm not that good at what I'm doing. Maybe, yeah, maybe I don't belong, whether it's at uni, whether it was in the workplace. These comments were kind of ongoing. And so because I'm not one that has a massive ego and that would never question myself, I started wondering, is do I belong? Maybe I should question whether I should keep doing this or just go for something completely different. And so I started thinking, I was like, there's two options here. Either they're right and I'm not capable and I'm not serious enough to do these things, or they're not and I am in fact capable of doing these things. And so I was like, what would speak for itself in terms of whether I'm capable or not? And obviously, what would speak for itself is the results. And so I looked into the results, and there was a pretty consistent outcome. Whenever I applied for a program, I would get in. I would get in through my efforts, I would get in through my applications, I would get in through my past results. I would get in pretty much every time. There's been some programs that I got rejected from, but for the majority, I got in. I finished those programs, each and every one of them. Not one time did I double, I think you say in English, double a year. Not one time did I fail at the final exams. I passed them all, one after the other. Another thing that was consistent is that in the workplace specifically, I would always meet expectations and sometimes exceed expectations. Some of my managers told me, we did not expect you to go this far, but you did. We're very happy with the results. And so that leads to this kind of cognitive dissonance, right? Because if I'm doing the work, if the results are there, if I have proof, like evidence, solid evidence of those results, then what's the issue? Why do I keep hearing those comments from my friends, from, people in the workplace or whatever? And so that's when I really started to have this realization that people often struggle to reconcile joy, lightheartedness, all these things, and intelligence and credibility. And that if you love life and if you're loud about it, you must be lacking rigor. And so the imposter syndrome that they kind of plant in you is rooted in identity, not in your ability. Or better said, it's rooted in the perception that they have of your identity rather than your ability. And what I find very interesting is that the brain actually strongly disagrees with this stereotype because in the wild, or even the way that we evolved as a human species, play is a form of cognitive flexibility. I'm an animal lover. I don't know if you are, but if you watch any animal documentary, or even if you have pets and you just observe them, especially like puppies, kitties, when they grow up, they literally learn through playing. Playing and mimicking. That's the two big things for any animal to learn and grow. So, in order for animals to survive and for us humans to survive back in the days, like thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, even, play is an essential part because it improves learning, your resilience, and social intelligence. And again, as an animal, if you're not social, you die. Not every animal, actually, but definitely the human species. We are social beings. So, without the group, you basically die. And dopamine plays a key role here because curiosity, enjoyment that goes with playing increase learning retention. They don't reduce it. And that's why it's so, so important. Like we often say about teachers, they're pedagogues and they can actually find ways to be teaching in a fun way, right? To make things accessible and understandable for their students. Because if you manage to create that dopamine effect, if you catch their attention that way, the attention span will be increased. So in this slide, being playful doesn't make you less focused. It actually makes you more available to focus. And so this idea that seriousness only equals intelligence is actually inaccurate. And so the problem is that when you're being kind of told, I guess implicitly, to tone down constantly, you start internalizing those doubts and you start wanting to, yeah, kind of tone yourself down and limit that playful side of you or being fully yourself, I guess. And that dynamic definitely followed me when I started thinking about entrepreneurship. I had internalized all those doubts by then. And I remember feeling shy about saying my ideas out loud. I was almost embarrassed. And the interesting thing is that I thought I had overcome all of that. And today that I'm working on a new project, it's much less strong than it used to be. But here again, here I am, wondering what people may think, if I'm going to be credible enough, and so on and so forth. Because at the time, some people reacted with something like, "Oh, you're starting a business?" It wasn't as obvious, but that's to kind of give you the idea of what it was. And saying things that sounded along the lines of, "Well, let's see how that goes." So it was never open hostility, but it felt almost worse. It felt like they were almost waiting, kind of watching and hoping for me to fail. And of course, I let it affect me. And I'm saying that not just to tell my story, but because I have heard so many similar stories, so many people that actually even give up sometimes on what they want to do because it affects them so much and they censor themselves completely. Luckily, at the time, I just shrank my ambition in conversations. I still kept going. But something that I was doing that I sometimes do to this day and that I see so many people doing is to kind of soften your confidence before anyone else can. So you kind of end up, being sarcastic about yourself or being humorous about yourself or throwing jokes at yourself before, like as a defense mechanism, so that no one can do it before you do. And that's just self protection. But then, of course, because imposter syndrome is actually, imposter syndrome is real, but the imposter in us oftentimes isn't real. So obviously, reality did its thing, and I did build that business. I've been talking about it before, and I grew it far beyond what people expected or even what I expected. And interestingly, the same people that were saying those things came back later saying that it was quite impressive. And of course, that gave me confidence back, but it also left me with a bitter question, which is why did I have to prove it so hard? Why was I not taken seriously just because I was lighthearted? And because you couldn't tell that being lighthearted, being playful, throwing jokes, enjoying life more than work doesn't mean that you cannot grow an expertise, that you cannot be serious, that you cannot be an entrepreneur, that you cannot be anything that you want, basically. And the problem that you may have noticed here is that even though things got better on paper, I did grow the business, things were going fine. The fact that people perceived me as legitimate gave me back more confidence. So again, it kind of fell back onto what people thought of me and what they were perceiving of me, as if I needed down the line their approval or, yeah, the approval of my peers to feel legit. And so down the line, I guess it's not so much people's perception that's the problem. It is all rooted in mindset, as always. And there's a lot of mindset content that I see out there about performance, about how to build your mindset to be performant, especially in business. But fewer people talk about identity. And there's an American psychologist, Carol Dweck, whose work on growth mindset shows how dangerous fixed labels can be. Because now with those fixed labels, it's not just that you think you're bad at something. Because if you say I'm bad at something, that could always mean that you could improve, you could get better. But it also it almost becomes, I'm not that kind of person. Like, it's not for me. And then when you say things like that, that almost means that you could never get better. That you as a person, your identity, or this thing doesn't match your identity, if that makes sense. And so if you couple that with the fact that being taken seriously kind of becomes a sort of a survival, like a social survival strategy, I guess, you start over-identifying with skills and competence. Skills and competence. You don't just want to do well, you want to be perceived as legitimate. And so being playful starts to feel dangerous because it threatens the image. It threatens the perception that people have of you. And as always, I want to talk about the connection between the body and the mind because it's always highly connected. And I definitely experienced that the past year. Because when you want to have others' approval, the problem is that you want to limit yourself to kind of contain the playful side of you. And the problem is that not everything can be fully controlled. And when you want to self-restrain for super long, and when you want to control fully and manage how you're perceived, and you hold yourself back, your true self back, that creates nervous system tension. And your body will eventually speak. And that's definitely what happened to me because I had some major back issues. For me, it was a herniated disc that came brutally into the picture. And that was kind of my sign that something needed to change and that I was not, I guess, being fully myself, or I was trying to control everything, not only the image, but many, many factors that I'm not going to get into right now. But my body definitely let me know that I could not control everything. And when I looked into it and I read about it and I really got interested in it, I found some very interesting information. One of them being that the spine is often associated with stability, control, and holding everything upright. That's kind of the symbolism around the spine, right? And when that injury happened, I remember feeling very strongly and very clearly that I couldn't hold it all anymore. And so there's this psychosomatic interpretation that really resonates with me and resonated with me when I was in the deep of it, trying to recover, is the idea that back problems often show up when control collapses. It can be back problems, but it can be other problems. My point being that if you don't understand through only your mindset that how crucial embracing your full self is, your body will remind you. It will remind you some way or another. And in my case, the lighthearted person, the playful part of me wanted some room to breathe, needed some room to breathe. And that's why I really like so much the idea of not only talking about, I guess, mindset and how you can improve mindset, but the connection between the mindset and the body, because your way of seeing things, your mindset, your way of perceiving things around you and to get better mentally, very often are deeply connected with how you feel in your body, not only obviously like obvious health, but also letting go in your body. So for me personally, that was my way, but there are as many ways as there are people, basically. I took dance as my main re-education into getting better, but also into getting that playfulness in me back. Obviously, I said it many, many times, for me was Afro dance specifically. And again, when I got interested in kind of the meaning for me behind it, everything connected very clearly because it is a dance that comes from the streets. It evolves constantly. It's a very alive, I guess, dance style. It's very expressive, it's performative, and it's true for every dance, but I found that it's specifically true for Afro dance. It asks something very specific of you, and that's to show it on your face, to let the body speak, and to not be afraid to look silly. That's literally the core of Afro dance, is to not be afraid to look silly and to have those very intense facial expressions that are not pretty. And the goal in Afro dance is not to be pretty, quite the opposite. And interestingly, a few days ago, as I was preparing this podcast episode, I was doing an online class of Afro dance, and the teacher said something that really stuck with me. He said, be brave enough to put your emotions out there. He used the word brave. He was like, just be brave to put those emotions on your face, to show your emotions with your body. And in Afro dance, it's really essential. And I found interesting somehow that this dance style was always the one that appealed to me so much. Meanwhile, my whole body demeanor, my whole mindset was kind of being crushed and being conditioned to grow up in a more, corporate environment where control, neutrality, seriousness, and composure were always the the most important. So this is the way that I personally found to take control back on not only my body, but to give myself permission to regain that silly side of me, to regain that lightheartedness that I've always had, but was kind of crushed in me, I guess. And I guess the conclusion that I reached over time about playfulness and being lighthearted is that it's just regulation. Playfulness is really what happens when you are grounded enough to let go. And it's very, very difficult when you are surrounded by people pressuring you. And I'm not putting the blame on people because they themselves have been pressured to think that way. And it's very difficult to go against the current. I really know that. But it's essential to somehow really understand that skills, competence, all of that will speak for itself. It will speak for itself no matter what people think of this lighthearted side of yours. Intelligence, being playful, enjoying life, all of that are allowed to coexist. So we're always kind of back to the same thing, that it's all about complexity and duality and that it needs to coexist and that people struggle with that. So again, I'll be back to a similar conclusion that I don't think in my case or in anyone's case, the problem was ever that I was being too playful or too unserious. But the problem comes from society, the world, call it whatever you want, that struggles with complexity and to reconcile opposites. And I guess the one thing I really want you to take away today is that, especially if your body has been asking you for more room, like you felt it in your body that something's wrong and that it's deeply connected to what's going on in your life, or the fact that you've been shrinking some parts of yourself, it's probably not asking you to change who you are really, but it's asking you to stop shrinking parts of yourself.